Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Friday, January 24th, 2020 is the year. We continue on with the impeachment trial of Donald Trump as well. It is Friday, the last day allocated to the House managers to make the end of their case. I believe they've got, I don't know where they called things off, but it looks like they have a significant chunk of time remaining. I don't know if they're going to use it all, but they could certainly go all day and into the evening. I think it's wise for them to use all that time and push the president's case into Saturday. No word, I don't think, at this point about whether they were going to seek some sort of waiver of the rules or an agreement to continue on Monday as opposed to continuing on Saturday. The normal rules would have them continuing in Saturday's session. The president is, of course, upset by this because he's thinking about television ratings, because he's an idiot and unfit for office. And I think was tweeting earlier this morning that he was upset because the defense would go on during what they call Death Valley in TV, is what he says they call Death Valley in the TV business. And, what other business is he in, really, besides the TV business? And I mean right now, as President of the United States. So, we'll see. I don't know. I mean, it's a weird thing. It could mean that on Saturday his fans could be home to watch television. And maybe they would. On the other hand, maybe they have something better to do. You never know. I would imagine he's probably correct about that. To the extent that ratings matter at all, you'd probably find viewership down on a Saturday afternoon, particularly, when there's so much else that you could be doing or watching. Although, I don't know, it's going to be a rainy day in the Washington area. Maybe people will be inside and watching television. Who knows? Daily Co's Radio is live now. I'm aware of this. I have only that to tell you. Bill tells me from Portland, Maine. That's the only way I know it's actually happening. Kagro X, me, David Waldman, has a cool Friday contest lined up. That's good. What is it, Bill? Be the 50th caller and you'll win a free pike. Yes, for the head of your choice. Plus tickets to Cats the movie. I think at which point you might put your own head on that pike. But, there's no accounting for taste. Anyway, here we are. Morning after the alleged circulation of the alleged threat of the alleged president that if you vote against the president, he was telling Republican senators sitting as jurors in this trial, your head will be on a pike. So, that's just sort of regular stuff to say to members of the Senate. I'm not really sure how this was conveyed. My understanding is that CBS News, in its evening newscast, was reporting that such a message had been delivered. By whom? To whom? I don't think anybody's entirely sure. It was clearly aimed at Republican senators, but it certainly wasn't an attributed comment. Although I did see some interesting theories circulated, including, I believe, our Twitter friend Sponson saying that he thought that it wasn't. It matches a typical pattern that Trump, I don't know who he sent to do the errand, but that Trump had intentionally leaked this message. I don't know whether that means he later denies that it actually went out, but he wanted to plant the story, or whether he would stand by the story or what. But as a way of intimidating people, but without coming straight out and saying it on video where everyone can see it. Although what he'd be afraid of doing that for, I don't know. Republicans, in the meantime, continue to pretend to have been more offended by what Jerry Nadler said at the end of the first day's argument, or was it at the end of the first day's, it was an argument over the question of amending the rules to allow for witnesses, in particular witnesses, to be called ahead of the beginning of the opening statements. But they're all still aghast at that. And do you know that somebody said that the president was a liar, or that we were complicit in the cover-up, but the president said he was going to execute us and stick our heads on pikes. So that seems, unusual, to say the least. But apparently not bothering Republican senators at this point. All right, so what are we going to do with this Friday? There are so many things that we could be doing. And let's see, there's some long reads we'll want to take into consideration. Some things perhaps off the impeachment topic. I don't know how long we'll dive into them, or we could make them the focus of an hour of the show, for all I know. We'll see where our train of thought takes us. Today, as I said, the last day under the control of the House managers with respect to presenting the case. As I understand it, moving forward from here, the president's defense team, of course, would be offered the same option, 24 hours spread out over 3 days. How much of it they'll take, we don't really know. If it's about making a substantive presentation, I think they might be happy to do it in a day and move on. On the other hand, I don't know if the president would lean on them to save their best material for Monday, if they have to have a Saturday session, blab about something on Saturday and then put your best material together for Monday. Don't know what the strategic thinking is with respect to cutting it off short of their full 24 hours or full 3 days in order to move the trial along longer. What was supposed to happen is the president's team would go Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, at which point they enter into, I don't know whether they have the vote at that point. I don't think so. First, it would be the 16 hours of questioning, during which it won't look like any sort of question and answer period, I guess, that we're used to. The senators are permitted to submit questions in writing, which is presumably what Marco Rubio has been doing with his quill pen the whole time, writing down questions along the way. I don't know if they're going to have 16 hours worth of questions, though they might get 16 hours worth of answers. That's possible. But there's a 16-hour period during which all these questions can be asked and answered. What the questions will be about, I'm not sure. They could certainly be more interesting questions if they had heard from witnesses or admitted new evidence and could weigh that. But I guess, I guess if they were paying attention, it's possible to come up with 16 hours worth of questions and answers about 48 hours worth of presentations. What did you mean when you said this or that? How do we know that something or other is the right conclusion given what you had to say? But I don't think senators were likely to have paid that much attention. Perhaps staffers did back in their offices, but no indication that the senators were that interested in what was happening. Although it is reported that Adam Schiff held their attention last night with his summation, which is being widely praised. I have seen the last critical 8 minutes or so of the presentation circulated on Twitter, and I think that because it was a public address, we might even be able to get away with running all of that audio. But I don't know if we're going to give over 8.5, 9 minutes of a chunk to something which you likely have either saw presented live or have seen the video of. But he made an excellent presentation and really hit them at a gut level, and has another day to go, by the way, but really hit them at a gut level. And the reporting is that the Republican senators, at least those still in the chamber, seem to be sitting, if not in rapt attention, then certainly were not distracted by electronic devices that they continue to sneak in, or, as I understand it, fidget spinners being distributed by Senator Burr, Aaron Burr's nephew, son, cousin. I don't know what the hell the relationship is. But we're not supposed to believe in that sort of treason running in the blood in this country. We're specifically prohibited from it, but I have my questions about whether it might not mean something. Anyway, given that he spent his time at the leadership of the Senate Intelligence Committee feeding information about what the hearings were turning up to the White House. Anyway, he's apparently distributing fidget spinners to the senators who just can't sit still without getting too bored for words in the impeachment hearing. I, of course, have confiscated all of those. I'm blocking the distribution of those otherwise duly allocated fidget spinners unless and until the senators agree to open up a corruption investigation into Senator Burr. That's just my prerogative as nobody in particular, and now you can see how it feels. Anyway, I did see that Schiff sort of hit him at gut level yesterday by reminding them that they know in their hearts that you can't trust Donald Trump to do the job he's supposed to be doing for the country. You know that you can't trust him to put the country's interests first ahead of his own. At one point during the speech, he actually, I think, screwed up and put those priorities in reverse order and said that you can't trust him to put his own interests ahead of those of the country. And of course, you can trust him to do that. I mean, it's not trust. It's just that's what you know is going to happen. But he made some really great points about that. And, suppose, I liked the bit that he said about you might be willing to give the president a pass and think he was just joking when he said, Russia, if you're listening, hack Hillary Clinton's emails. And then they went ahead and actually did hack Hillary Clinton's email or attempt to hack other people's emails, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe, I don't know, I guess he was saying, you might have tried to pretend you thought he was still kidding when he said China should join in interfering in the 2020 elections and should open an investigation of the Bidens. And you know that you can't trust him not to give them a better deal on trade if they agree to do it, if they were to take the bait. And it's right. It's correct. And I think he hit them at a gut level. And at the time that he's telling them, you can't trust him to have your back. And if it benefits him personally to sell you out as his allies, saving his skin from this impeachment, he'll do it. And he'll do it in a second. I don't know if he actually made that point as explicitly as he could have, but he's got another day to do it. Because at the same time, he was allegedly disseminating the threat that he would put their heads on pikes if they didn't do his bidding. And by the way, those of you who are Republican senators, are you listening? Republican senators, if you're listening, I doubt that they are. But if you know a Republican senator and you'd like to communicate this to him, he's threatening you with, I guess up to 53 pikes for your heads, although we don't need all 53 of you to agree that he ought to be removed from office, but it would be nice if you would. You can, first of all, as was pointed out almost immediately, get together and defeat that threat. I mean, if you voted to remove him from office in numbers, then he wouldn't be in a position to put your head on a pike, after all. Of course, there is the argument that he's put forth in his brief that says even if you do agree to remove him from office, he won't go. But I don't know whether he's going to be able to get anybody to agree to put your heads on pikes after you vote to remove him from office. If he's not president, he can't hurt you. So keep that in mind. Another way of putting that, by the way, is you really only need one pike to solve this problem of the president threatening 53 of you to put 53 of your heads on 53 pikes. It's going to be solved with one pike. Just put his head on it instead. There are, of course, warnings, admonitions, sayings that people pretend that they've been saying for hundreds of years, but I don't know how long they've really been saying it. But if you come at the king, right? I've heard various incarnations of it. If you come at the king, you best not miss. Don't miss. You don't even need a pike. You just need to vote. The vote is in your hands. When the time comes, just say guilty and he's not a problem for you anymore. Wouldn't that be nice? Then Mike Pence is your problem. Now, they might get around to impeaching Mike Pence too, but I don't think we'll get to that before the election. However, I do think, I say that even though I actually fully believe that Democrats should be working on additional counts of impeachment and should seek to bring them before the election. But knowing our Democrats in the House of Representatives, I doubt very much whether they agree that that's strategically wise. And that's what drives most of what they do. Of course, that would call into question the conclusion, I thought a very fine conclusion that Nancy Pelosi had come to, that he's given us no choice. But, that rhetoric is, it was worth having when it meant we were going to get this trial, even though we knew what the outcome of the trial was likely to be. If it was real, if she really believed it, well, then, yeah, I would report out other articles of impeachment. And quite honestly, keeping the Senate tied up in this exercise for the rest of the year until the elections is preferable to me. I don't know whether members of the House agree that it's strategically better. I'm sure they are worried about a political backlash, or that the great middle would say, what? Oh, again, this is such a waste of time. Or worse, that Democrats would say, well, there's so many bills sitting in the Senate that they can't get to, and we're not going to pass them and help the American people. We need to allow the Senate to do its business. But the business of the Senate at the moment is obstructing all those hundreds of bills that you've passed. They have no intention of passing those things. And if you freed them up by not sending more articles of impeachment, they would continue to not pass them. And I think you'd look like an idiot if you thought that was going to happen. I'm sure out of the hundreds that are sitting there are, I would guess, one or two that might even actually be really important, that they might feel politically if they didn't pass, and maybe they would get to those. But they, give them a couple of days, and you just tell them, you've got until Friday, and then we're going to impeach the president again, and see if they get to it. I don't know. And if they don't, good, impeach the president and let them cover up again and let the voters go to the polls with that message in their head. They won't do it quite that way, but all right. What else can we expect from House managers today? Well, I'm hopeful that they have had a look through, and I think they're taking the trial seriously enough that they're even willing to take the president's brief seriously. Someone must have read this thing. And I assume that they have made a decision, and if the decision was to confront these things, to prepare for them and to present today, that they will preemptively take on some of the other defenses that the president's defense team has hinted they will consider. They spent yesterday taking on most of the more traditional, or not traditional really, but the defenses we've heard already from the president's defenders, if not his actual defense team. Some of them have been repeated by the defense team, but the things we've been hearing for weeks were confronted, dismantled, and debunked to the best of their ability. I mean, they'll repeat them, the president's team, when they have uninterrupted argument time, will simply reinstate them and refuse to agree that they have been debunked. But I haven't seen, maybe you have if you watch more closely, any discussion of the more inventive arguments in the brief that we discussed yesterday. For instance, in my opinion, the most effective of the bunch was the argument that because the House subpoenas, pursuant to which most of the evidence presented by the House managers were gathered, that those subpoenas were issued before the October 31st date that they put under the October 31st formal vote of the full House to formally announce that they had opened impeachment inquiries. I think they may have if not a legal case that would stand up on its own, a persuasive case and some good legalistic cover for senators to vote not guilty on a technicality. It would allow them actually to say, well, I do think he's guilty. They wouldn't want to say this. And there are plenty of reasons not to. But if they felt compelled to say, well, I think the presentation makes it awfully difficult not to conclude that he's guilty. But in this country, we have rules about gathering evidence and how that evidence is gathered. And if it was gathered pursuant to an invalid subpoena, I view that as equivalent to having been gathered by an invalid search warrant and would exclude the evidence in my consideration. We may or may not get a ruling to that effect, either from Chief Justice Roberts on a motion from the President's Defense Counsel or after the questioning period, or we may not even get a ruling on that, even if it's put to the chair and he defers it to the Senate body to decide by itself. I'm not certain whether we get that far. They may just make up their own minds about it. And, that's interesting now that I think about it. Not all senators will buy into it, but if they vote to acquit him, interestingly, according to one of the president's own arguments in the brief, should we consider the acquittal to pass constitutional muster if we don't know for sure that the requisite number of senators all agreed on one or more reasons for the acquittal? What if, what do we need to do? If there's 67 votes to convict, then what does that even leave? That leaves 34 votes out there, 33 votes, right? 67, to 33 is what it would take to acquit or to remove him. So I guess so long as there are 34 votes of not guilty, that's the minimum necessary. Of course, I guess we expect something in the neighborhood of 53 votes of not guilty. I don't know whether any Democrats are going to vote not guilty or not. But if there are 53 not guilty votes, but let's say, I don't know, no more than 33 agree on any particular reason for the acquittal, does it pass constitutional muster? It does. But according to their brief argument, I guess you could argue that it doesn't. But anyway, I think the more effective argument that they have to make in terms of giving senators cover, I could absolutely see them coming to the conclusion that the president may have done these things. They may even warrant removal from office. But the evidence that proves that he did those things is fruit of the poison tree, as they usually say when you're talking about invalid search warrants as the originating source of the evidence. But I guess they could hang it on invalid subpoenas instead. Which would, of course, leave them open I'm sure they're gambling that Democrats don't have it in them to come back and say, all right, well, we then now declare ourselves back in impeachment mode by a vote of the full House. We are issuing those subpoenas, and the cooperating witnesses can come in and we'll take their depositions again, or we'll simply have them come in for 5 minutes to swear that they would say the same thing that they said last time and adopt their affidavits by acclamation or whatever, however you would put it, and reconstruct the record of the recalcitrant witnesses refusing lawful subpoenas, or maybe they would change their minds, who knows, and bring it right back and say we've cured that defect. Of course, it never was a defect, so you shouldn't give in to that sort of stupidity and waste any time recreating the record. But I guess you could. Anyway, that's a fairly troubling argument, if only not, even if not legally, then for giving senators cover. They could absolutely point to that and say, it's not that I wasn't convinced by the evidence, it's that I think the evidence was inadmissible and I can't consider it in my determination of guilt or innocence. Had they laid the same facts out and done so properly and legally according to legal process, then I might have come to a different conclusion. But alas, they did not. I find that very dangerous. I don't know if you can undo it because, there's no logic that can undo it if they decide that's going to be the reason, whether it's true or not, or whether there's any logic to it or not. So I guess that leads me to the question of, do you spend time validating it as an argument by addressing it? Or do you say, well, we can take it apart now so that when you hear Republican senators offering it as an excuse later, you will know that it is a baseless excuse. And I think I'm leaning more towards that. We'll see whether they spend any time on it. Whether they spend any time on the claim that, for instance, the whole impeachment inquiry from top to bottom is invalid because of the reverse chronology of the declaration of the House that they were in impeachment mode and then coming after the issuance of subpoenas. Whether that renders the entire impeachment proceeding questionable enough for the president, and I don't think there's any reason for him to argue this because I don't think they're in any danger of it, that 67 votes would not even legally, constitutionally remove him from office. I don't know. On the other hand, if you make that argument and if you just spend some time saying, well, I won't even spend any time debunking that. Let me just make you aware of the fact that the president says this. Plus he says he'll put the heads on pikes. Might that do something? Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. I think taken together, those two things. Let me see if I can't tweet that out because that's of some interest. Everybody's still sharing the CBS News report about this head on a pike thing. But I think taken together with the idea that somehow the president contends that he wouldn't leave office or wouldn't need to leave office even if 67 plus senators were to vote to convict and remove him from office, combined with also I'll chop your head off and put it on a pike, is probably of some interest to honest people. But essentially we're dealing with we're well outside the realms of logic and honesty. But anyway, I just thought I'd lay that out there. That's something that I hope that they'll spend some time on today and do so strategically. The answers will be upon us starting at 1 p.m., and I guess we'll wait patiently for that to begin. Other things worth mentioning. Let's see. What else is out there? Oh, yes. Here's just one small tidbit. I thought this was an interesting observation. Good eye from Dan Diamond at Politico, noting that the nation's opioid crisis stops being a public health emergency now. Why? Because people at the HHS forgot to renew the very important designation. You'll recall, of course, when President Trump needed to pretend for those members of his voting base that he took the opioid crisis seriously, and said, I take it so seriously, we're going to declare a public health emergency over it. I'm going to make one of those proclamations and then show it around to the crowd gathered around me at the Resolute desk. Apparently that's something that needs to get renewed each year, and they just forgot to do it because, of course, the opioid crisis is top of mind for these guys. And, not a major thing in terms of what's being done about the opioid crisis, because even while it was a public health emergency, they weren't doing anything. You may recall, is that one they gave to Jared? Or at some point, I think it was also handed off to Kellyanne Conway. Neither one of them likely to do anything about anything, and they just forgot, and they dropped the ball. And I don't know, maybe you can just declare it a public health emergency all over again and show the document a second or third time, and no one will notice because, well, most of them are addicted to opioids if they care, or if they are troubled over a family member being addicted to opioids. I'm sure they don't care whether anyone declares it an emergency or not. Just, a note of interest. Let's see. I thought this was an interesting write-up just to go over one of the stories we discussed the other day with more coherent thought, I think. Will Bunch, as if he were watching my Twitter feed, which I guess technically he is, although I'm not saying that he wrote this because of that, but he probably noticed the same things I did because our Twitter feeds are similar, and I'm glad he took up his pen, typewriter, quill, I don't know, whatever he writes with. Saudi Arabia, you know about them, murdered a journalist and hacked Jeff Bezos. And by the way, they hacked the journalist as well. They hacked him into pieces. Trump sent them U.S. troops. Seems like a good trade, right? Just sort of taking up the fact that, I'm just saying that you thought he was kidding. Russia, if you're listening. China, if you're listening. Your head's going to be on a pike. I'm not going to leave even if you convict me, etc. He's friends with the guy who chops people into pieces and hacks Jeff Bezos' phone himself. So, I couldn't really tell you for sure whether he's just kidding about any of this stuff. I don't doubt that they would have put Jamal Khashoggi's head on a spike if they thought they could get away with that. They just threw it away in a bag instead. If you're in that minority of folks who actually watch impeachment trials of the President of the United States, Will begins, and were thus either spellbound or bored on Wednesday by the soaring Hamiltonian rhetoric of lead House Democratic manager Representative Adam Schiff, you might not have heard about this yet, but the political equivalent of a nuclear bomb just exploded in the Persian Gulf, or at least the news should have had that kind of impact, but these days, it just never happens. Two top experts for the United Nations on cyber crimes have confirmed an explosive theory that's been ticking for the last year, that Saudi Arabia is what he says, was behind the phone hacking of then, anyway, world's richest man, Amazon founder and Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos, right before salacious pictures and texts that ended Bezos' marriage were published in the National Enquirer. But the revelation carried a shocking twist. The hack itself was allegedly carried out when the Saudis' de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or as somebody else said, Mohammed, what was it? I can't remember. It's a good alternative to the Mr. Bonesaw. But I guess maybe Mohammed Bone Sawman. It's not a bad moniker, really. Traded phone numbers with Bezos and then personally sent him a message infected with malware. That was a surprising twist. The report is so mind-blowing on so many levels, it's hard to separate out which part is worse. That the dictatorial ruler of one of the world's richest countries committed a major cyber crime that could also have sparked a blackmail campaign against an American billionaire, or anybody for that matter, or that the underlying crime that triggered this was the violent murder and dismemberment by bonesaw of a U.S.-based columnist for the Washington Post, or that under the bended knee pro-Saudi lapdoggery of President Trump, the United States not only isn't investigating or even responding to an all-out foreign attack on American press freedom, but has rewarded MBS's blood-drenched regime with a mercenary army of U.S. troops and our nuclear secrets. Don't forget about that weird scandal, right? The scandal has nothing to do with Trump's impeachment trial that began in earnest this week and everything to do with it. The president's see-no-evil defenders on Capitol Hill are trying, quite unconvincingly, to convince the American people that Trump's impeachment isn't about an extensive effort to hijack the power of the U.S. government and its dollars, to bully a foreign ally and get dirt to cheat in an election, but merely a dispute over one random phone call. What's so important to understand is that Donald Trump's abuse of the American presidency isn't random. It goes way beyond one phone call. The president's tin horn dictator cashing in tendencies are so pervasive that there is usually more than one example on any given day. Take Wednesday, for example. A few minutes before the Democratic arguments in the impeachment trial, the D.C. Attorney General filed a lawsuit accusing Trump and his daughter Ivanka of steering $1 million in inaugural donations, which came from corporations or shady people seeking White House favors, like Gordon Sondland, to the Trump Organization's D.C. hotel for an insanely overpriced ballroom rental. It's another reminder that removing Trump over one phone call to Ukraine is the equivalent of nailing murderer Al Capone on his tax returns. Underwhelming, yet necessary. Greg hears that, right? But the Trump-Saudi Khashoggi post-Bezos Inquirer nexus, if you can have a nexus with that many nodes to it, arguably the worst of the worst, betraying how an unfit president has sold out U.S. policy, and even our young troops, to murderous dictators while championing the obliteration of the civil liberties like press freedom that might restrain tyranny in America and in our so-called allies. It's also a very complicated, long-running saga. So much so that I wrote up a detailed timeline and stashed it on my Twitter feed for those who want to know more. It's linked. You can take a look. But here are the major twists and turns in the U.S.-Saudi relations. There's Trump and the Saudis. It begins this way. In August 2016, right after Trump's shock GOP nomination, Donald Trump Jr. held a Trump Tower meeting. He's constantly holding Trump Tower meetings with controversial figures, this time with Middle East fixer and past and future convicted pedophile George Nader. Yes, that's true. And we didn't get to Nader's latest news, in which he was actually convicted again of possession of child pornography. And what that may mean for, well, any number of ongoing investigations. Anyway, George Nader was at the meeting, a mysterious Israeli expert in PsyOps, that is psychological operations, named Joel Zamel, Z-A-M-E-L, and founder of the Blackwater mercenary firm Eric Prince. Nader said the rulers of Saudi Arabia and its ally, the United Arab Emirates, wanted to help Trump win in November and pitched a secret social media campaign by Zamel to help. Participants swear this never happened, yet A, Nader wrote Zamel a $2 million check, and B, Zamel's firm gave an If I Did It presentation on aiding Trump. Once elected, Trump announced Saudi Arabia would be his first foreign trip, and that his Middle East point man would be son-in-law Jared Kushner, who became fast friends with MBS. On an October 2017 visit, Kushner allegedly shared classified U.S. intel with MBS ahead of a brutal crackdown on dissidents, including members of his own royal family, as you may recall. Instead of cooling U.S.-Saudi relations, the Saudis' October 2018 murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi was followed by A, Trump's unqualified support for MBS's regime, which wasn't even his regime yet, B, a secret transfer of American nuclear technology to Riyadh just days after the killing, C, a 2019 move by Trump, elected on a promise to bring U.S. forces home from the Middle East, to instead send thousands of American troops to the kingdom for, allegedly anyway, a $500 million check, which no one has found yet. Trump, the National Enquirer, and the Saudis is up next. Another covert player in Trump's surprise election in November 2016 was David Pecker, publisher of the supermarket tabloid. For years, Pecker's Enquirer had stored racy secrets about Trump in an actual safe. And in 2016, it carried out 2 unlawful schemes to keep Trump's illicit paramours out of the news. In 2017, Trump welcomed Pecker at the White House along with a guest, a French top advisor to MBS. A year later, Pecker and the Enquirer's parent published a glossy, overpriced tribute to the Magic Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the youthful dynamism of MBS. Yes, I remember that issue as well. The Saudis and the Washington Post is the next section. Meanwhile, he says, in December of 2016, Saudi Arabia had banished a well-known journalist, Jamal Khashoggi. His sin? Writing a column that criticized Donald Trump. Does everyone remember that that's the case? The exiled Khashoggi took up residence in the United States and began a regular op-ed column in the Post in 2017. Shortly after that, MBS told an associate that he wanted Khashoggi to stop writing and vowed to use, quote, a bullet on him. And he broke that promise, unless he shot him after dismembering him. In October of 2018, Khashoggi, of course, had an appointment at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul for paperwork he needed for his pending marriage. There, as detailed by Turkish intelligence, thuggish Saudi agents brutally murdered the Post journalist and most likely dismembered him with a bone saw brought for the occasion. His body's never been found. The Saudis eventually claimed his killing was an accident by rogue operatives, but the CIA concluded that the assassination was ordered by MBS. The publisher of the Post and journalists there have decried a cover-up and demanded justice, which reportedly flamed MBS's anger at the Post and its owner, Bezos. Next up, Trump and the Washington Post. You know, that relationship isn't very good either. MBS wasn't the only global autocrat who had a beef with one of America's two most prominent newspapers. President Trump directed much of his fury over negative coverage in the Post at its owner, Bezos. He personally lobbied the Postmaster General, this is also impeachable, to double the postal rates that affected the core business of Bezos' Amazon. What's more, Amazon has accused the president, with some evidence on its side, of intervening to deny the firm a massive $10 billion Pentagon computing contract solely because of Trump's animosity to the owner of one of his main press critics. What about MBS and Bezos? Well, in April of 2018, MBS and Bezos, who, like most American businessmen, smelled opportunity in the Saudis' oil riches, held what seemed like a friendly meeting while the Crown Prince was on a whirlwind, star-studded U.S. tour. They even exchanged personal phone numbers. On May 1st, 2018, according to the UN security experts, MBS sent Bezos a WhatsApp message, same app that MBS and Kushner used to chat, by the way, and used it to infect the Amazon and Post mogul's phone with a kind of malware that allowed Saudi intelligence to hack its contents. In January of 2019, after the Khashoggi's murder and the Post's crusade for justice, Bezos made the stunning announcement he was divorcing his longtime wife, Mackenzie, hours before Pecker's Inquirer published texts and racy photos between the billionaire and a secret lover. Bezos took to the internet to complain the Inquirer was essentially blackmailing him and to air his suspicions that the Saudis were behind the hack. The Saudis denied it, so did the Inquirer, which uncharacteristically claimed the lover's brother was a source. They usually don't tell, right? A report in Friday's New York Times stressed that a link between the Saudi hacking and the article has not yet been established. Wednesday's stunning UN report, siding with Bezos and implicating the Saudis with the direct involvement of MBS, provides some long-awaited answers but also raises a host of questions, many of them bouncing right off the Trump White House. One of the most important relates directly to Trump's impeachment. Remember the whistleblower who kicked off the Ukraine scandal in part because the record of Trump's now infamous July 25th phone call with the new Ukrainian president was hidden on a secret computer server? Trump's calls with MBS were moved to that same servers. What is he hiding about those calls? And here's some other questions. What unauthorized intelligence did Kushner, who was denied a security clearance but continued to review top-secret material, share with MBS? What, if anything, did Trump and Kushner know about the Saudis and Khashoggi, both before the murder and immediately after? What was the White House's exact role in forging the unholy alliance between MBS and the Inquirer? And why did Trump himself, sounding like a two-bit Brooklyn mobster, tweet a hectoring post calling the Washington Post owner, Jeff Bozo, just minutes after the Inquirer piece dropped? How closely does he really watch the Inquirer? I mean, it's probably his favorite publication, but still, it's supposed to be busy. Certainly, the Justice Department needs to investigate the phone hacking of a prominent U.S. businessman, although the chances of Trump's lapdog, Attorney General William Barr, doing a good job on that front seem dim. Congress has its hands full right now with all of Trump's wrongdoing on top of all the other people's business, but it's imperative that House Democrats launch a full investigation of the Trump-Saudi alliance and where it overlapped with this foreign power's blood-soaked illegal campaign against the major American newspaper. More importantly, given the overwhelming evidence tying the top leadership of the Saudi kingdom to the murder, illegal phone hacking, and possibly blackmail, why are we continuing to support them with U.S. troops, with aid for MBS's immoral war in Yemen, and with nuclear secrets that were transferred unlawfully without informing Congress? Because that's the problem we're having right now in our impeachment inquiry, yeah? And there's one more thing about all of this that really, really bothers me, in case you want to know. It's not surprising that the Saudi revelations have gotten lost in the swamp of Trump's all-day impeachment blowout, but the tenor of what coverage has taken place has been a little too much entertainment tonight. Ooh, billionaire hacks sexy pics from rival billionaire. In fact, what has just transpired over the last 15 months ago, or rather, what has just transpired, that's what it says. What has just transpired over the last 15 months, let's say, has been one of the most egregious attacks ever against the First Amendment and American press freedom conducted by a foreign dictator. And so far, the official U.S. government response has been to reward the attacker. That could well have been a part of Adam Schiff's presentation last night. You don't think he'll simply reward the people who take his side, no matter whether it's in the interest of the United States? In fact, won't he actively avoid what's in the interest of the United States and ask, what's in it for me? He's done it here too. The public should be very alarmed about such a blatant and murderous foreign assault on one of our most fundamental American liberties, the freedom to commit acts of journalism. There's a tendency to dismiss Trump's enemies of the people rhetoric against journalists as just that, empty oratory to whip up his core supporters. Oh, he's just joking. They've murdered a journalist, folks. But the Washington Post's Jamal Khashoggi wrote columns criticizing President Trump and his close allies, the Saudis. For doing that, he was murdered, dismembered, and dumped in an unknown location. And when his newspaper complained, their owner, an American citizen, was illegally hacked and blackmailed. This is what enemies of the people looks like in the blood red living color. And it's spectacularly ugly. It's a story of two autocrats separated by an ocean, but joined in their ambition to literally murder journalism when it threatens their power. And, as the facts finally begin to dribble out, this nation, well, some of it anyway, is witnessing the spectacle of 53 Republican senators drenched in cowardly personal ambition who have the nerve to timidly agree that abusing the power of the presidency to supplant the noble words of the Constitution with narcissism and greed somehow isn't an impeachable crime. The truth was already dying the autumn day that we watched Jamal Khashoggi disappear, and yet did nothing. Now we're just watching it bleed out up on Capitol Hill. Well, that's true, so I thought I would share it with you. Well, cogently put together by Will Bunch. Better than my own rambling about it, but on the same point. Anyway, let's see. Other amazing events to note. Oh, let's see. Things we can share before the break. Let's try this one. On an impeachment-related front, let's share this very popular diary from Daily Kos from, all right, what do we got here? How about this? DS, here, we've got to read through the username and try and decipher how will we say it. Here it's DS, not T.S. Eliot. Get it? It's D.S. Eliot, I guess, is our author here. Not to be confused with T.S. Eliot, possibly no relation. So D.S. Eliot had this to say. I guess what we really wanted to do here, rather than read through the entire diary, which is a fine diary, but in the interest of time, I'll boil down the main point for you. Intriguing question, as the title. Was there a non-stated reason that Speaker Pelosi held the articles of impeachment? One we haven't talked about yet. And there is, or at least a good argument, there is a good argument for believing that there is. Long story short here is that it is D.S. Eliot's thinking that the oratory has been so remarkable, the presentations so powerful from the House managers, that you wonder how long it might have taken them to prepare these remarks. Like, it seems like, at least in most cases, that the remarks are pretty well crafted. Although I must say that it's been fairly evident, particularly yesterday, in the second day, where it's been very evident to me that Adam Schiff is equally elegant on the fly. He's responding in real time to the arguments that Trump defenders are making, actually during the breaks in the trial. He's watching, or his staff is watching. They seem to be monitoring the comments being made, in particular by Republican senators and occasionally Republican members of the House who are observing the trial. In speaking to the press during the breaks, I noticed, I've been watching on C-SPAN, and I was making some commentary on what they were saying because some of it was so ludicrous. But it seemed to me, for instance, that yesterday Congressman Lee Zeldin had made some comments during the break that were pretty egregious. And let's see if I can scroll back and find them from yesterday. There was a point at which Lee Zeldin and Elise Stefanik and a couple other of the more, a couple of the grubbier House members found their way to cameras and microphones yesterday and had some comments during one of the breaks and said some particularly odious things. Now, Zeldin, as I recall, let's see, first, should I tell you about what I saw the senators say? Maybe we can add that later, but we can get back to the topic of this diary instead. But Zeldin had said that he was professing to be puzzled as to why Democrats believed that if Russia interfered in the 2016 election, then Ukraine didn't. It was his claim that Democrats were saying, well, because everybody knows Russia interfered, that must mean that claims that Ukraine may have interfered can't be right. Of course, it's possible that both of them could have meddled in the election. The problem is that there's enormous amounts of evidence that the Russians did meddle, and that it's been the conclusion of our intelligence community that they did meddle, and likewise their conclusion that there's no evidence that the Ukrainians did meddle, and it is their conclusion that they did not. You don't automatically have to accept the findings of the intelligence community to be able to acknowledge, though, that no one has put forth any decent information that could be relied upon as solid evidence that the Ukrainians did anything, except the Russians, who would like very much for people to believe that it wasn't them. And if it wasn't them, but it did happen, it must have been someone. So why not the Ukrainians? Because we are at war with Ukraine. But anyway, that apparently escaped Lee Zeldin. What leads people to conclude that Russia did and Ukraine didn't is that no one of any competence has suggested that Ukraine did. It's just something they say, and that's all there is to it. And it seemed like Schiff came back from the break and addressed that directly. So good on him for being able to respond on the fly. But the question being posed by D.S. Eliot was there an unstated reason that Pelosi held the articles of impeachment? And it's his theory that by holding them back and ensuring that the trial couldn't begin for some period of time, even though even had she not held them, no one expected the trial to begin any sooner than January 6th at the earliest. And instead it started about a week later than people thought it really would. But that by holding back the articles of impeachment for a certain amount of time, she gave the House managers, or the people who probably believed that they had, pretty good reason to believe that they were going to be House managers, they hadn't been named at that point, gave them the opportunity that they needed to prepare the kind of case they needed to present. The extra time almost certainly benefited the House managers in preparing their presentations. Certainly the audiovisual team was glad for whatever additional delay there was. But as we've discussed in the past, the delay wasn't anything, wasn't probably no more than a week more than was already anticipated. But I'm sure that extra week was of some value. But really to both sides. I think both sides benefit from it. It's not like you can say that it was unfairly to the benefit of the House managers, considering that the delay applied to the defense team as well. But a good theory and entirely possible, right? All we need is another week or so before we can be ready. And you can hold them indefinitely if you want, but it may have been that the topic of discussion at the Democratic caucus meeting that Tuesday, some 2 weeks ago, that the discussion was, people claim to be feeling the pressure either at home or whatever, or in the newspapers. Some of you may want to release those articles now, and I guess raise your hands if you want that. And if it looked like a majority of the caucus was in favor of letting it go, she may very well have turned to Nadler and or Schiff and maybe some of the others that she knew she was considering as House managers and said, you ready to go? Yeah. I think we've had enough time. We're probably very well prepared. We've rehearsed. We've got our audio-visual aids prepared. And we've been timing and testing our rhetoric. We're ready to go release those articles after all. And so they did. I thought a great thought. Good work, DS. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. And, all right, let's see. What other items are available for us to discuss? We got a little more room here. I was going to try to squeeze this in before the break. Short item. Just wanted to let those of you who are longtime KITM listeners know that FIFA has made it back into the news in association with Donald Trump's name somehow. I just happened to see this on Twitter yesterday and grabbed it from Sports Illustrated. I do forget who was tweeting about it at this point, but there's, soccer news of some kind reported here in Sports Illustrated. But the second item in this sort of roundup of soccer news is the one I was looking at. Let me get this ad out of the way. Where does this begin? Here we are. The developing relationship between Trump and the new FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, which is the sort of name that ordinarily would raise eyebrows if discussed here in the United States, but I believe he's actually Italian, and that's the sort of name they give to people in Italy, not just because they're mobsters here in the United States, and not all Italians are by any means, but it's the sort of name that if you were discussing it here in the United States in the 1920s, let's say, or maybe later, even in the 80s, in the 50s, you pick your decade. Gianni Infantino, oh yeah. Baby Johnny, yeah, I know him. Sure. Anyway, let's see, how do they lead into this? I guess they just jump from one soccer story into this. The developing relationship between Trump and Infantino. FIFA President Gianni Infantino introduced President Trump at a dinner in Davos, Switzerland on Tuesday when they were over there for the World Economic Forum. The latest sign that the two men have developed a close relationship. There is embedded here a tweet from the White House account with some video of the introduction. Don't know if we care to listen to that, but here they are tweeting. Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA, introduces President Donald Trump, using his Twitter handle, at a dinner with global CEOs! Exclamation point, even. A source close to Infantino pointed out that the event on Tuesday was a dinner hosted by the White House, and Trump invited Infantino to be the one who did his introduction. So it's not necessarily the case that at some dinner, Gianni Infantino said, "My pal, Donald Trump, I can't wait to introduce you." This was set up by the White House, but Infantino agreed to do it. Now, how did they become pals is the question. Infantino met Trump when U.S. Soccer was putting together its bid with Mexico and Canada to host World Cup 2026. The Federation's connection to the White House, I'm told, was Jared Kushner, whose recent cover story in Time magazine showed a file in his desk cabinet named FIFA. And I figured at the time, even though I had some fun with it and I tweeted it around with the KITM hashtag and noting that there was a FIFA file at the time, I figured it probably was about that bid for the World Cup. But it was a mighty thin file. So, I guess he didn't do a whole lot of work on trying to bring the World Cup to North America, the NAFTA World Cup. But, I remember in all our discussions, why they would be pursuing such a thing. And the answer, of course, is it brings a certain amount of prestige to the host country, but it really brings money and the opportunity to siphon lots of that money off for personal enrichment. And that's been a huge problem for FIFA events for a long time. So no mystery that FIFA would suddenly find itself bouncing back and forth between Russia, Persian Gulf states like Qatar, and the United States. Just sort of the triumvirate. And we're going to make sure we get grafted from all directions. Anyway, a source, where do we leave off on this? Right, Kushner. Infantino and Trump now contact each other directly, which probably means WhatsApp, which is fun to think about. Leaving U.S. soccer out of things most of the time, and the FIFA president has been seen several times with Trump in recent months, including at the White House and at Trump's resort in New Jersey. On Tuesday, CNBC's Eamon Javers, I don't know, did he say Yavers? Eamon Javers reported that Infantino had this to say to Trump, and the quote is, "I have to inform you that the U.S. is on the verge of becoming the soccer power of the world." Well, they are in the women's side anyway. That's certainly the case in the women's game, but not in the men's. The source close to Infantino said he was referring, though, to the economic side of soccer in the United States. Like, can you grift lots of money off of it and kick some of it back to me, which I'll expect you to do if I award you the World Cup. Anyway, that's it. No grand or conspiratorial conclusions from all of it, but just letting you know, Trump's putting himself back in the mix of FIFA because, of course, it's an enormously corrupt organization and has huge problems with corruption. But, of course, Trump is very concerned about corruption internationally. Yeah, so just another example of himself, of putting himself out there fighting corruption, not benefiting from it. Let's see. And then it's a great picture of him watching looking intently at Infantino while he's doing the introduction with that blobfish face that he makes, that the lips pressed together and almost pout. He's a really disgusting looking person, quite honestly. Anyway, Infantino is, by the way, appears to be shaved bald, and between the two of them, they have a normal amount of hair, and maybe that's why they make such a good pair. They're dressed similarly, too. I can't see how long Infantino's tie is, though. But they're wearing the red power tie, and I think that's intentional. So look out for more corruption in FIFA and more graft by the Trump gang on that front. Reminder, of course, that two of the most corrupt officials in FIFA's history, Chuck Blazer and was it Jack Warner? Was that his name? Both had taken up residence in Trump Tower for some strange reason during the 1980s and early 1990s until Blazer's flip and death. And anyway, that was always a weird situation. Just sort of a note for those of you observing along the way what's happening on the FIFA corruption side. All right, so that's on the record. Let's see. We might as well note for the record while we're discussing impeachment and moving through pocket here. over at Fox News, still not able to entirely control Judge Andrew Napolitano, who early on in this process basically drew the conclusion that all normal people had drawn. The president probably did it. There's overwhelming evidence of his guilt. He should probably be convicted. And now he says it again. Trump's Senate impeachment trial. What does it take to remove a president? Judge Andrew Napolitano writes over at the Fox News website. Shall we run through it just for fun? Sure, why not? I don't blame President Trump for his angst and bitterness over his impeachment by the House of Representatives. In his mind, he has done, quote, nothing wrong and not acted outside the constitutional powers vested in him, and so his impeachment should not have come to pass. He believes that the president can legally extract personal concessions from the recipients of foreign aid, and he also believes that he can legally order his subordinates to ignore congressional subpoenas. Hence, his public denunciations of his Senate trial as a charade, a joke, and a hoax. His trial is not a charade or a joke or a hoax. It is deadly serious business based on well-established constitutional norms. The House of Representatives, in proceedings in which the president chose not to participate, was barred from, as he claims, impeached Trump for abuse of power and contempt of Congress. The abuse consists of his efforts to extract a personal political favor from the president of Ukraine as a precondition for the delivery of $391 million in military aid. The favor he wanted was, of course, the announcement of a Ukrainian investigation of former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. The GAO, you know about them, a nonpartisan entity in the federal government that monitors how feds spend tax revenue, has concluded that Trump's request for a favor was a violation of law because only Congress can impose conditions on government expenditures. And other reasons. It's an interesting spin on it, though. So when the president did that, he usurped Congress's role and acted unlawfully. But did he act criminally? And is it constitutionally necessary for the House to point to a specific federal crime committed by the president in order to impeach him and trigger a Senate trial? We know the answer is no. The backstory that he provides is this. The Constitution prescribes the bases for impeachment as treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. However, the use of the word crimes doesn't refer to violations of federal criminal statutes, but rather to behavior that's so destructive of the constitutional order that it's the moral equivalent of statutory crimes. For example, as others have suggested, if the president moved to Russia and ran the executive branch from there, or if he announced that Roman Catholics were unfit for office, he would not have committed any crimes, yet surely these acts would be impeachable because, when done by the president, they are moral equivalent of crimes and are so far removed from constitutional norms as to be impeachable. I don't know. Well, I mean, certainly impeachable, but I don't know that they're not crimes. But okay. In Trump's case, though the House chose delicately not to accuse the president of specific crimes, there is enough evidence here to do so. Federal election laws prescribe as criminal the mere solicitation of help for a political campaign from a foreign national or government. There's no dispute that Trump did this, unless you're Mike Braun. In fact, the case for this is stronger now than it was when the House impeached him last year. Since then, more evidence, which Trump tried to suppress, has come to light. That evidence consists of an administration official's emails that were obtained by the media pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act, demonstrating conclusively that Trump ordered the halt on the release of the funds within minutes of his favor request, and the aid sat undistributed until congressional pressure became too much for Trump to bear. This implicates two other crimes: bribery, the refusal to perform a government obligation until a thing of value is delivered, whether the thing of value here is the announcement of the Ukraine investigation of the Bidens, arrives or not. The other is contempt of Congress, expressed in the articles as obstruction of Congress. If the request for the announcement of an investigation of the Bidens manifested nothing wrong, as Trump has claimed, why did he whisper it in secret rather than order it of the Justice Department? Why not have the Justice Department do it? When the House Select Committee on Intelligence sought the emails unearthed by the press and then sought testimony from their authors, Trump thumbed his nose at the House. Instead of complying with the House subpoenas or challenging them in court, Trump's folks threw them in a drawer. Earlier this week, his lawyers argued that those actions were lawful, and they imposed a burden on the House to seek the aid of the courts in enforcing House subpoenas. Such an argument puts the cart before the horse. Under the Constitution, the House has the sole power of impeachment. The House does not need the approval of the judiciary to obtain evidence of impeachable offenses from executive branch officials. We know that obstruction of Congress is a crime. Just ask former New York Yankees pitching great Roger Clemens. Boston just went crazy. Who was tried for it and acquitted. We also know that obstruction of Congress by ordering subordinates not to comply with the House impeachment subpoenas is an impeachable offense by itself. We know that because the House Judiciary voted to charge President Nixon with obstruction of Congress when he refused to comply with subpoenas, and the full House voted for an article of impeachment against President Clinton when he refused to surrender subpoenaed evidence. Where does this all leave us at the outset of Trump's Senate trial? Well, with valid, lawful, constitutional arguments for Trump's impeachment that he ought to take seriously. That is, unless he knows he'll be acquitted because Republican senators have told him so. Whoever may have whispered that into his ear is unworthy of sitting as a juror and has violated the oath of impartial justice and fidelity to the Constitution and the law. Womp womp. Too bad. What is required for removal of the president? A demonstration of presidential commission of high crimes and misdemeanors, in which Trump's case, the evidence is ample and uncontradicted. So it's on the Fox News website, but I don't know how many Fox News watchers read the website. And of course, they've had fights between their commentators before. And we'll see where this one leads. Let's see. Other bits and pieces of information that require some attention. We did tell you about, but didn't read through, the reports about Donald and Ivanka being involved in the grift off of the inauguration fund through spiked prices at the Trump DC hotel. We read the front page piece by Walter Einko, right? I think. Yeah, we did. We didn't read through the ProPublica exposition of it, but I think that Walter's summary of it probably will suffice. So we'll save that or share that. I think we probably shared that article too. If we didn't, we'll include it in today's summary. Maybe go back to it. I mean, I'd like to see whether we can comb over it for any more details. But at the moment, I think I want to move over to this kind of interesting story. Which one is the new piece about this? Yes. Okay. Well, the Twitter account that tips us off to this, somebody we've, I think, called her name once or twice before, Olga Lautman, who tweets as Olga NYC 1211 1211. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but I have no time to figure it out. But Olga Lautman strikes me as one of the other independent theorists / researchers out there who have been doing some pretty good work and feeding us some plausible thoughts about information as it's emerging. She's in this case exasperatedly, is that a word? Exasperatedly tweeting, FFS, for F's sake, I guess. Rinat Akhmetshin. You remember that guy's name? Rinat Akhmetshin, she writes here, a Soviet counterintelligence officer who, and this is how you may remember him, was involved in the June 2016 Donald Trump Jr. / Russia strategy session at Trump Tower, the adoption meeting that wasn't about adoption, or the dirt on Hillary Clinton meeting that they say wasn't about dirt on Hillary Clinton, but was. He was there as a translator, I believe. But anyway, he's back in the news, and he's weird looking too, because there's pictures of him now. Not because there's pictures of him, but that's how you can tell that he's weird looking. But he's back in the news, having opened a non-profit, Russian-American Anti-Defamation League this month in D.C. And I can't say that there's no need for it, flatly. I mean, Russians are being maligned left and right, but I think for the most part, rightfully so. But you could see that they might want to say, well, not all Russians or Russian Americans should be subject to the same suspicion that you might want to reserve for Vladimir Putin or whatever. That's probably the most innocent explanation of it. But she's, I guess, not buying into the innocent explanations. She feels it's probably another outlet to move money in time for the election. And attached is a Daily Beast piece about the new project from Lachlan Markay, and maybe we can run through a bit of that and see what's up. Russian-American lobbyist of Trump Tower meeting fame forms his own anti-defamation league. Rinat Akhmetshin was one of 2 Russians to attend the now infamous June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with Trump aides and family members. And he's a Russian-American dual citizen, the piece begins, who found himself at the center of allegations of Kremlin meddling in the 2016 presidential election, has established a new nonprofit to combat the political vilification of his erstwhile countrymen. Rinat Akhmetshin is a Washington-based lobbyist and former Soviet military officer, whose 2016 meeting with Trump campaign hands, including the president's son and son-in-law, was a major subject of interest for investigations into Russian election meddling. Last week, he officially incorporated the nonprofit Russian-American Anti-Defamation League. Does that spell anything? Russian-American Radl. No, I guess not. Can we make anything better out of that? Well, anyway, that according to District of Columbia corporate records. The nonprofit's specific plans weren't immediately clear. Neither Akhmetshin nor his attorney responded to requests for comment, but the group's formation comes as Akhmetshin tries to sustain legal action against a prominent Kremlin critic who dubbed him a Russian spy. Allegations that caught fire after Akhmetshin's June 2016 meeting with top Trump campaign aides came to light the following year. Akhmetshin formed the Russian-American Anti-Defamation League on January 16th, according to the corporate records. The group is headquartered at his Washington home. Very convenient. Short commute. The group's formation came a couple months after Akhmetshin appealed a federal court's dismissal of his libel case against Bill Browder, a businessman who has spearheaded campaigns around the globe to sanction corrupt Russian government officials. You remember him he was Magnitsky's boss, and when Magnitsky was murdered, he lobbied around the world for those global Magnitsky acts. Browder labeled Akhmetshin a Russian intelligence asset and a Russian GRU officer in a number of tweets that Akhmetshin alleges were defamatory. He sued in 2018 in federal court in Washington. Suit was dismissed on jurisdictional grounds last year. Akhmetshin's appeal is currently pending. And he played a significant role in the controversy surrounding Russian meddling in the 2016 election and the investigation into the Trump campaign's knowledge or solicitation of it. He was one of 2 Russian nationals who met with Trump aides, including Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, and Donald Trump Jr. in the summer of 2016 after promising damaging information on Hillary Clinton. After the Mueller probe concluded and found no proof of Trump campaign collusion with the Russian government, amazingly enough, Akhmetshin told ABC News that the affair had, quote, hit me hard financially and led to baseless personal attacks. After his Trump Tower meeting came to light, the New York Times reported that Akhmetshin has an association with a former deputy head of a Russian spy service, the FSB, and a history of working for close allies of President Vladimir Putin. Last year, BuzzFeed News reported that financial investigations had flagged a number of suspicious payments to Akhmetshin around the time of the Trump Tower meeting. Do you remember that? Akhmetshin and Natalia Veselnitskaya, the other Russian who attended the Trump Tower meeting, also worked with the opposition research firm Fusion GPS to dig into Browder's business activities in Russia on behalf of a sanctioned Russian company. That work coincided with Fusion's efforts to dig up dirt on Trump during the 2016 presidential campaign. Remember how the entirety of the Mueller report was invalid and the investigation should never have started because Fusion GPS was working for the Clinton campaign? It's interesting that they never mentioned that they were also working for Rinat Akhmetshin and Natalia Veselnitskaya as they met with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort to hand over dirt on Hillary Clinton. Strange. They must have some amazing firewalls there at Fusion GPS. Anyway, the piece concludes, last year Akhmetshin was paid $60,000 to assist with lobbying efforts on behalf of a former Kazakh government official accused, you'll never believe it, of defrauding the country out of millions. Very interesting. But they all need representation. To harken back to the weird payments, Olga also tweeted out a link to this older story from, let's see, originally from February of last year, updated in mid-April. Interestingly, I don't know what the new material is, but this one has 5 bylines attached to it for BuzzFeed. Emma Loop, Anthony Cormier, Jason Leopold, Tanya Kozyreva, maybe, and John Templon, all contributing to this piece, which tells us a lobbyist at the Trump Tower meeting received $500,000 in suspicious payments. A bank flagged transactions including large cash deposits made before and after Rinat Akhmetshin attended the 2016 Trump Tower meeting. I don't know whether it's worth our time to make our way all the way through this, but I'll send you all a link to the article. But it seems to me that the piece you need to know is that cash payments totaling, what did they say? $500,000 immediately before and then immediately after that Trump Tower meeting. Seems like sort of an important piece of the puzzle that I either didn't know about or had forgotten over time. So just let that stew for a little while and add it to the pile of evidence. Let's see. Oh, yes. Why not this for Friday? Perhaps we can save that for the last segment, though. But I did want to get back to see what that Jacobin magazine piece had to say for itself about Ronald Reagan's colluding with the Iranians prior to the 1980 election. That'll sort of set the table for the impeachment hearings with some historical background. Let's see. Anything else that we might be able to sneak in before the break? I don't know whether there's anything here. Oh, you know what? I wanted to share. I did send this around yesterday in response to an Empty Wheel tweet on the subject. Where did I park that one? Here. It just was an observation that I thought was an important one about Lev Parnas, who is, of course, much in the news again these days, and we really ought to check in with what's going on with him, too. So we'll debate which direction we go in our last segment. But, Lev Parnas, now very much under attack from Republican sources as untrustworthy, now that he is dumping information that's damning to the president and to many other Republican members of Congress who've been covering for him. They now say, well, you can't trust what Lev Parnas says. He's he's under indictment. And I noticed that Empty Wheel was saying, technically speaking, Donald Trump is under indictment, having been indicted by the House of Representatives and now on trial in the Senate. If being under indictment is the standard for being untrustworthy, then Donald Trump is untrustworthy. You could argue about whether or not being under indictment is that standard, but you don't need Donald Trump to be under indictment to know that he's untrustworthy, clearly. But in particular, using that attack against Lev Parnas. Lev Parnas probably is untrustworthy, indicted or not. Okay, so you take what he has to say with a grain of salt and comb through it and see what you can use and what you can't and what's corroborated elsewhere and what isn't. But good point, I think, made by Jim Sciutto, CNN, co-anchor of CNN Newsroom, as a matter of fact, and whose name we've mentioned occasionally on the air before, made this very interesting and a strong point in response to these claims that he's somehow untrustworthy. Remember that Parnas is so untrustworthy, in fact, that he was repeatedly in contact with top aides to the ranking Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, and perhaps with the ranking member himself, Devin Nunes. They're so untrustworthy that these guys couldn't get enough Lev Parnas when they thought he was exclusively on their side. Now that it turns out that he might be simply trying to save his skin or actually flipping or who knows what, setting us up for something. In the end, they would like us all to know that he's extremely untrustworthy because he's under indictment, and that indictment should in no way reflect on their ability to do their jobs by becoming known that they were intimately involved with him and were being fed information of all sorts by him directly and led them down these idiotic paths into conspiracy theory nonsense and embarrassing themselves in front of the body politic of the United States of America. But lay that aside. He's untrustworthy now, you see. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. I think the microphone popped back on before I was done with what should have been silenced, but hopefully didn't disrupt things for you too much. Let's see. Man, there's a lot to get to, and I'm scrolling back, and there's so many things we left aside. I did mention earlier George Nader's name. Why was he? I can't even remember. What the hell were we talking about? Oh, yeah, he was at one of the secret meetings at some point, somewhere along the line. I guess also in Trump Tower. And I mentioned that he was in trouble again. Let me just put that one on the record, and then I can share that article with you. George Nader, key witness in Mueller probe, pleads guilty. So that's all you need to know. Pleads guilty to child sex charges again. This is from January 13th, so it's not that old. A little more than 10 days old. Rachel Weiner reporting this for the Washington Post. George Nader, a key witness in the special counsel probe of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, admitted Monday to bringing a 14-year-old boy to the United States for sex and to possessing child pornography. A wealthy Lebanese-American businessman with long-standing political influence in Washington, believe it or not, and the Middle East, Nader faces at least a decade in federal prison after his guilty plea in federal court in Alexandria, Virginia. While the charges carry a maximum penalty of 30 years, prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia agreed to recommend the mandatory minimum of 10. Sentencing is set for April 10th. Prosecutors also agreed that Nader, 60, a dual citizen, can ask to leave the country immediately after his prison sentence is complete, rather than serve probation. He already has a conviction in the same court for transporting child pornography in 1991, for which he served 6 months in prison, and I guess they now are hitting their heads. Wish we had done that long. Now, why would you then recommend the minimum after that? A recidivist child pornographer, eh? Well, they're anxious to get him out of the country, I guess. In exchange for his plea, prosecutors dropped new charges of transporting child pornography and obscene materials, and he will not be charged for similar conduct in the Eastern District of New York or in Washington. Nader still faces charges in Washington federal court of conspiring to funnel illegal campaign contributions to both sides, Democrats and Republicans, and I'm sure they're really thrilled with that one over on the Republican side. As an advisor to the leadership of the United Arab Emirates, Nader met several times with officials and associates of President Trump during the early days of the administration. He helped set up a January 2017 meeting between Trump associate Eric Prince and a Russian official close to Russian President Vladimir Putin that was closely scrutinized by then Special Counsel Robert Mueller, the Seychelles meeting. While Nader was being interviewed by the Special Counsel team about that outreach, agents found child pornography on his phone and referred it to others in the FBI for investigation. Nader arranged for the 14-year-old to travel from the Czech Republic. That's where Donald Trump was importing his bikini models from back in the day, to Nader's Washington home in February of 2000, and the boy stayed in the country for about a month. Not long after, according to his attorneys, Nader went on to serve as a contractor with the Defense Department and an advisor on Middle East policy for the George W. Bush administration. But he's cool because he paints now and shares candy. Law enforcement got a tip about the boy 2 years later, but Nader had left the country. But boy, did he come back, huh? In 2003, he was convicted in the Czech Republic for sexual contact with minor boys. According to Czech court documents, he paid at least 5 teenage boys, 4 of whom were under 15, to engage in sex acts. Nader enticed the boys with money, jewelry, mobile telephones, clothing, care, and housing, according to the court record, and took some to Prague's annual St. Matthew's Fair. The document says he took one boy who was at least 15 and facing possible time in a Czech juvenile detention center to the United States and gave him housing, food, and spending money in exchange for sexual acts. The Virginia case involves a different child, so he does this a lot. In court, one of Nader's current attorneys described the 2003 conviction as having a relationship with 2 young men 2 years under the age of consent. The age of consent in the Czech Republic is 15. Nader was sentenced to a year in Czech prison. He didn't return to the United States until 2009. So he had been convicted in the United States in 91. He was convicted in the Czech Republic in 2003. He comes back to the United States. They're like, why don't you hang out with us here in the Republican Party and advise us on the Middle East? Anyway, he maintains that the images of children found on his phone during the Mueller investigation were not child pornography. Mike Braun agrees. He didn't even have them. But he admitted that in late 2012, while in New York, he received an email that included child pornography. The man who sent the email will probably be charged in California, according to people familiar with the case. His name is redacted in the public court documents. That's the end of the article. But at the time we picked that article up, it was of some interest because, of course, it was Nader who was instrumental in arranging that very first state visit by Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia, where, of course, he engaged in the stupid-looking sword dance and maybe sold $1 billion worth of weapons, maybe transferred some nuclear technology, signed on to a program of murdering U.S. journalists, I guess, and mercenary deployment of American troops, if necessary, later on, etc., etc. George Nader is at the center of this relationship that Will Bunch was describing so accurately and so brutally earlier in the program. And that guy's going to jail on his, third conviction for child pornography, but Comet Pizza, yada, yada, QAnon, whatever. We're not guilty of any of these things. It's an amazing world out there. But you know that because you're watching the impeachment trial come to a close. All right. Still many, 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 many things that we should be catching up on. What did I promise before the break? I have to scroll so far back to find what I had in mind. And as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, oh, I forgot to do this. I forgot to do that. We haven't been through any of these things. Let's see. Back up to the top. Tidbit for discussion on your own over the break of the weekend. The Guardian has an extensive piece revealing the true identity of the leader of an American neo-Nazi terror group, now known as the Base, intentionally known as the Base. I think they knew what they were getting into when they chose the Base as the name of as the English translation of Al Qaeda. Anyway, it turns out that Mr. Whitey Whiteface, white nationalist dude, isn't Anglo or Saxon, but Italian. And his real name is Ronaldo, he goes by Ron, Nazzaro, Nazzaro. And he's an Italian-American dude from New Jersey who went to, Villanova and, whatever. Is otherwise living in relative anonymity, or was in the New Jersey area for the longest time, and now is who knows where, on the lam and living and writing under a pseudonym and organizing an outright Nazi Civil War type resistance group. So take that for what it's worth. And of course, he adopted the He-Man bro name of Norman Spear. Norman, get it? Because, Anglo-Saxon. But whatever. He's an Italian, as it turns out. But don't tell anybody. This is the case with all the weirdo alt-right Nazi leaders. They all turn out to be not what they're supposed to be, I guess, and all that. But who cares? Anyway, I just thought I would at least note that for the record for you. Let's see. We got down as far as this. Yes, right. I wanted to look into what Jacobin magazine had under the hood with respect to this Reagan thing. Did I not keep that open? I might have lost track. Oh, there it is. Okay, so now I've got too many copies of the tweet open, but I was looking at the tweet of David Graeber, anthropologist, who is the one who commented, so it's official, Ronald Reagan became president of the United States by committing the crime of high treason. Not the high crime of treason, but the cream of treason. Yes, that's an excellent breakfast food. Everyone loves it. To offer to pay a declared enemy not to release American officials they hold hostage is about as clear an example of treason as you can get. We'll take a look at the Jacobin magazine article on it. How long does this thing run? Ronald Reagan's October surprise plot was real after all, according to Branko Marcetic. I'm guessing at the pronunciation of his last name. In Jacobin magazine, do they date their work or not? Let's just flip through this quickly. A batch of quietly released documents confirms what many have long suspected. Ronald Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign worked behind the scenes to delay the release of U.S. hostages in Iran for the benefit of Reagan's election campaign. It raises the question, when was the last time a Republican won a presidential election without the help of dirty tricks? Oh, they asked that question outright. That I wondered about the other day and supposed it might be Eisenhower. The 2020s began with such a hair-raising blitz of Iran-related news that you probably missed the bombshell revelation about U.S.-Iranian relations that came with the end of the 2010s. Rather than a potential U.S.-Iran war today, this particular story transports us back to a more innocent time when politics was about principles and Republican presidents were decent men. I'm sure he doesn't believe this. The beginning of the Reagan era. At question is the 1980 presidential election between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, specifically the October surprise that is alleged to have handed Reagan the election, long dismissed as a conspiracy theory. The whole saga is lengthy and convoluted, but the core allegation is this, that in the middle of the Iran hostage crisis, the Reagan campaign made a secret deal with the new rulers of Iran to delay the release of the hostages until after the election, dooming Carter's chances of victory. The allegation, doggedly pursued by the late investigative journalist Robert Parry, spawned books and even a 1992 congressional investigation, which determined there was no credible evidence supporting any attempt or proposal by the Reagan presidential campaign to delay the release of the American hostages in Iran. Parry and others looking into the case were attacked in the media, with much of the issue revolving around whether or not Reagan's campaign manager and later free press-hating CIA Director William Casey had traveled to Madrid on a particular date to meet with Iranian government representatives. Well, nearly 17 years after the House October Surprise Task Force concluded that the whole idea was bunk, an outlet no less venerable than the New York Times has turned that conclusion on its head. Just 3 days out from a new decade, the Times published what in any other era would have been a bombshell story based on documents donated to Yale from the offices of David Rockefeller. Oh, yes. So we did talk about this already, but different spin on it from Jacobin, I guess. That Rockefeller, the former chairman of the Chase Manhattan Corporation. So maybe we can end the inquiry here. It's not something new. It's something we forgot about already. Jacobin's point here being correct, was lost in the shuffle. Ostensibly a story about how Rockefeller and Chase worked behind the scenes to win their client, the repressive Shah of Iran, safe haven in the United States, this nugget appears about halfway through. We would have read the nugget, right? The team around Mr. Rockefeller, a lifelong Republican with a dim view of Mr. Carter's dovish foreign policy, collaborated closely with the Reagan campaign in its efforts to preempt and discourage what it derisively labeled an October surprise, ironically. They were using that in the reverse. A pre-election release of the American hostages, the paper show. I'm distracted thinking about this. Another example of weird projection / reverse projection. I guess it reminds me a lot of like when Trent Lott dubbed the nuclear option, and then Democrats picked up on it and said he's calling it the nuclear option, and we see why. That's a good name for it, nuclear option. And then they said, oh, that's bad, and that's bad for us, bad PR. We'll switch to the constitutional option, and blamed Democrats for naming it the nuclear option. Here we have Republicans saying we need to stop Carter from pulling an October surprise by winning the release of the hostages, which is what he's supposed to be doing, working toward as president of the United States, of course. We need to stop him from accomplishing that. And the best way for us to do it is, in our view, is speak to the leaders of Iran, which we're not supposed to be doing as not president of the United States, and get them to delay it. And so that became known as the October surprise. But at first they were trying to label Carter's efforts to do what he was supposed to do as president as something other than what he should be doing, and that it was a big October surprise. We'll call it the October surprise, and that'll cast doubt on the rightness of trying to get American hostages released as president of the United States, which is an insane gamble. And it worked, because the world is insane. The nugget that appeared halfway through continues this way. The Chase team helped the Reagan campaign gather and spread rumors about possible payoffs to win the release, because that's what they were going to do. A propaganda effort that the Carter administration officials have said impeded talks to free the captives. I had given my all to thwarting any effort by the Carter officials to pull off the long suspected October surprise, Mr. Reed wrote in a letter to his family after the election, apparently referring to the Chase effort to track and discourage a hostage release deal. He was later named Mr. Reagan's ambassador to Morocco, when in fact he should have been captured as a traitor and executed in the electric chair. Dang, we missed out on that one. Mr. Reed was Joseph Reed Jr., Rockefeller's chief of staff, who mandated that the documents should stay sealed until Rockefeller's death, which came in 2017. It's not hard to see why. Critics will quibble that these documents don't prove the actual specifics of the long-alleged October surprise. This is true. According to the Times, they don't show Reagan striking a deal with the Iranians to delay the release of the American hostages until after the election, but simply working behind the scenes to thwart negotiations to free them. Perhaps someone out there exists who thinks this is better. Of course, these weren't the only shenanigans Reagan got up to during that election. His campaign also famously got hold of Carter's debate strategy papers in advance of their one and only debate in 1980, and less famously was alleged to have used retired CIA officials and a mole within the Carter administration to gather information about its foreign policy, mostly, as the Times reported in 1983, in relation to the Iran hostage crisis. For those counting, that's now at least 4 of the last 6 Republican presidents who have won elections with the assistance of some sort of pre-election skullduggery, including Richard Nixon's torpedoing of peace in Vietnam, the George W. Bush campaign shenanigans in Florida, and the later use of the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, and Donald Trump's boost from Russia hacking the Democratic Party emails, even if that wasn't coordinated. That's how you get published in Jacobin, you got to say that. Not to mention the use of voter suppression that unites them all. And that's not counting George H.W. Bush getting help from John Major's government in the UK to beat Clinton in 1992. But I just count George H.W. Bush as a continuation of the Reagan administration anyway. The story is also a perfect example of the way the worlds of capital, politics and foreign affairs blur together. The head of one of the country's largest banks, helping his right-wing political allies unseat their opponent, and saving the skin of one lucrative foreign dictator, all while drawing on the expertise of a team of political elites, from Henry Kissinger and a former CIA director to a member of one of the country's most prominent political families. Big business and the political establishment have long worked together, just as they used to do it more quietly. As understated as it was, it's remarkable this story has received as little attention as it has. The hallmark of the Trump era, where even the New York Times, publishing secret government files on UFOs, barely makes a blip. All right. Well done. Duly noted, and I think on point. Speaking of, because it involved Iran, maybe we'll scroll down to this story once mentioned but never fully read through, unless I can't find the damn thing. Yes. You know what? I'm going to take from Digby's blog. But did you notice, by the way, if you're not a regular reader of Digby's blog, it has moved. I think it was always traditionally on like Blogspot, and I think she's given up on that and moved to her own domain called digbysblog.net. In case you have trouble finding the old one, I'm sure you were redirected to this one. I noticed it because I just click on her links all the time whenever she or anybody else who writes there talks about what they're up to, and when it's of particular interest, I just go directly there. But for those of you who like to visit the blog daily, you likely already know this. But she put together a nice summary of the various stories that I had grabbed for sharing with you on the Trump Hotel in Baku, Azerbaijan, when almost having a war with Iran was actually a hot topic. Remember that a million years ago? Ivanka and the Iranian Guards. Digby published back on January 14th. And illustrated with a couple of photos shared, I guess, I don't know what, on her Facebook page, Ivanka's Facebook page, from Ivanka's desk, Trump Hotel Baku, standing around with her hair up so that she can put on a hard hat and look like she's doing something, that sort of thing. Anyway, this I thought was a good summary of things and might fit into our program before we hand things over to Justice. Digby starts out this way. I'm going to post these tweets by New Yorker writer Adam Davidson, who was always all over the Trump Hotel Baku story, and who was the author of the pieces that we were talking about the other day when this was a subject of discussion. And he was tweeting up a storm during the almost war with Iran, letting everybody know that the general who was assassinated was, of course, top ranking in Iran's Revolutionary Guards. And while Trump was telling everybody that the money for the missiles that they launched at the joint American-Iraqi base came from the Obama administration giving them pallets of cash, and that whole story having been debunked as, it's not a payment from the U.S., it was their own frozen assets. And the reason they couldn't get a hold of those assets was because the Obama administration had been so effective in blocking their participation in international banking, which drove them, ironically, to try to make up for that loss by laundering money around the world, including with the help of Donald Trump. Donald Trump paid for those missiles by laundering Iranian Revolutionary Guards money. So Digby, just by way of documenting the atrocities, says, I'm going to post these tweets by New Yorker writer Adam Davidson for posterity. The Trump-Azerbaijan Tower project is a notoriously shady deal, and for some reason, nobody seems to care. Just like we no longer care about Reagan arranging the October surprise. If only they had used, she says, a private email server. Then people might care. All right, so here are the tweets. This is the thread. For reporters needing to convince editors that they can safely mention Trump's prior financial ties to the IRGC, here are the receipts. The Trump Organization proudly announced its Baku, Azerbaijan project in 2014. The deal began in 2010, signed in 2011, with a link to PR Newswire announcement of it. Ivanka Trump led the effort. This was when they were trying to make a serious businesswoman out of her. This according to her Facebook page. Her official partner was Anar Mammadov, I'm guessing, M-A-M-M-A, Mama, right? M-A-M-M-A-D-O-V, son of Zia Mammadov, or Mammadov, perhaps, Azerbaijan's transportation minister. U.S. State Department officials refer to Mammadov as notoriously corrupt even for Azerbaijan. That's a quote. That same cable in which they did that explained that Kamal and Keomar's Darvishi, oh my, I'm sure I ruined those names, ran an alleged Revolutionary Guard-controlled business in Iran and developed a close business relationship / friendship with Azerbaijan Minister of Transportation Zaya Mammadov. It's spelled differently even here. A Swedish prosecutor filed a case against Bombardier for a corrupt rail contract in Azerbaijan. The documents the prosecutor uncovered showed the corrupt case implicated the IRGC's Darvishi brothers and Mammadov. Swedish prosecutor Thomas Forsberg has a lot of documentation that shows a tie between Mammadov and the Darvishis in this scam. Taken together, this evidence shows the Mammadovs and Darvishis were almost certainly making hundreds of millions of dollars through corrupt rail and road contracts precisely when the Trump organization was doing business with them. The Trumps say they didn't know until 2015, though a simple Google search would have revealed most of it, but they continued doing their business after they learned all of this. And that was 2015, so he's running for president at this point. The next key bit is to show that the Darvishis were not independent Iranian businessmen, but were a front for the IRGC, doing the bidding of Qasem Soleimani, who, of course, Trump decided he eventually needed to kill for reasons. That's actually the easiest part. Start with a Farsi translation of their own web page, which he links to here, which will tell you all of that. Note that most of their Iran projects were ones controlled by the IRGC's Khatam al-Anbiya construction entity. Also note that during the same period Trump was working on the project, the Darvishi brothers both took leaves from their business to work for Tehran's mayor, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, I'm mangling that, I'm sure, a lifelong senior IRGC official and close ally of Soleimani. Ghalibaf, with the Darvishis as his key deputies, previously ran the IRGC Air Force and its efforts to acquire WMD missile guidance systems. Look at the Tehran Metro construction project. It was under Ghalibaf's control. He gave much of the work to the Darvishis, and we can safely assume they pocketed huge amounts of corrupt money. Again, at the same time, they were partnering with Mammadov, who was using the Trump Tower to launder his money. While we can't say for sure, it is certainly compelling that the major IRGC money laundering operation had one major external partner, Mammadov, who had one major business partner, and that's Trump. Since, once again, Alan Garton, chief legal officer for the Trump organization, says they learned all this in the summer of 2015. They had a contractual right to audit the financial books of the Mammadovs. They clearly could have alerted authorities. They did nothing until December of 2016. Here's something crucial. Trump did not just profit from the IRGC, he was materially helpful in their efforts. The goal of money laundering, of course, is to spread huge amounts of money around the world without detection. Without Trump, this project would have been stymied. Mammadov and the Darvishis are international pariahs. They would have been flagged by banks and SWIFT and other transfer services, but by calling this a Trump project, it was far easier to send large amounts of money through the banking system around the world. We don't know precisely how much money was involved or how it was used, but the evidence suggests it was a lot of money, possibly in the billions, and that these are very bad people who use their money for very bad things. WMD acquisition, terror financing, etc. In short, while running for president, Trump was knowingly providing material help to an enemy of the United States for about $5 million. That was his take. At a minimum, we should report that Trump's concern about Soleimani and the IRGC is a very recent development. There's a ton more investigative meat on this bone, lots to uncover about Trump and Mammadov and others, and this is just one of many shady projects the company was doing at the time. Consider his work, of course, with, oh my God, I can't even pronounce that name, Going On Now. in Indonesia. Harry Tano, for short, I guess is how they're referring to him, tied to some ISIS-linked groups, according to The Intercept. The Trump Organization defense is, we were just licensing our name. But that is the problem. They are selling a shiny American brand to evildoers so they can do their evil more easily. There's more to be done, but the core story is bulletproof, he says. Fully ready to pass a fact-check and legal review, and it's very simple as well. On responding to Trump and Iran include, hey, until recently, Trump knowingly participated in an IRGC front operation to launder money. Reporters are invited to DM him or email him for more details, of course, and think about how effective that would be if we were ever to turn our attention back to the fact that we almost went to war with Iran, or if you just wanted to explore things from the viewpoint of, well, things have cooled down now that Trump has used American military might to assassinate a loose end in one of his own money laundering schemes.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, it's Friday, so we're gone for the weekend. Justice Putnam picks things up next as we prepare to enter into the last day of the opening arguments from the House managers. He's got that and much more, and always got some international news to really color things in case we missed developments from around the world. Stay tuned.